You wrinkle your nose as you approach the National Palace. The whole city stinks of tropical decay and rubbish. You are a Marine, Major Smedley Butler, old Gimlet Eye, hero of the Boxer Rebellion, and you are on a mission. Inside the palace is a Haitian president who is doing everything possible to delay signing a treaty to legalize the American occupation of his nation, and it's your job to get him to sign, one way or the other. The frightened staff tell you the president has locked himself in the bathroom, so you pound on the door. A lazy voice answers back. "Just 1 minute, monsieur. Come back later." It's time to teach him a lesson. Outside, you find a ladder and climb up towards the open toilet window, only to discover President Dutinav sitting on a porcelain commode, fully dressed in pinstripe trousers, morning coat and top hat, smoking a cigar and reading a copy of Petite Parisienne. As you leap through the window, he looks at you horrified, and the cigar falls from his mouth. Thrusting the treaty and a fountain pen into his hands, for good measure, you also pull out your Bowie knife. "Sign this treaty, now, or I'll cut off something that's very dear to you." The terrified president really does void his bowels this time, frantically signing the treaty, leaving the now blubbering man sitting behind you on his toilet. You stride out with a smirk of triumph on your face. Such is how empires are made. The American occupation of Haiti has begun. I'm your host, James Barton. Welcome to Forgotten Wars.
This country is at war with Germany.
Today, our armed forces joined our NATO allies in airstrikes against Serbian forces.
In the first few hours after our servicemen went to the rescue of young Americans and of democracy in Grenada,
Damals uns ausgebeten. Wollen diese 4 Jahre nutzen.
Hello everyone, welcome to the show. Our next series is particularly relevant as the Caribbean nation of Haiti continues to collapse before our eyes. 90% of the capital of Port-au-Prince is now under gang rule. The response of the international community? A small beleaguered force of Kenyan policemen besieged in the remaining 10% of the city. How did things get so bad? Why does the press and Haiti's neighbours seem to care so little? To answer those questions today, we'll explore America's forgotten occupation of Haiti, and then in our next episode, we'll cover the farce that was Operation Uphold Democracy. Once the richest place on the planet, thanks to sugar and slavery, the terrible conditions on the plantations had led to history's only successful slave revolt. If you're interested, listen to episode 4 of this podcast. Even after throwing off the French shackles, Haiti was a deeply unstable nation. Of the 22 rulers between 1843 and 1915, only one served out his term of office. During those years, there were at least 102 civil wars, coups, revolts, and other political disorders. Despite the instability, Haiti had perfected an almost gentlemanly procedure for launching a coup. Politics was dominated by the small French-speaking mixed-race elite that ruled the country, so coups were virtually a family affair. A small clique from this community would get upset with the current president. They would select an alternative candidate and line up financing for him from the German merchant community in Port-au-Prince, which of course expected to make a tidy profit on its investment out of public funds once the usurper seized power. The would-be president would journey to the wild, mountainous north of Haiti, where he would recruit mercenaries, and part-time bandits known as cacos after a local bird of prey, with promises of loot. The cacos would march south towards Port-au-Prince, plundering coastal towns as they went. Since the Haitian army was corrupt and ineffectual, there was little to slow their progress. Upon the cacos' arrival at the outskirts of the capital, the incumbent president would go quickly and quietly into foreign exile, taking a portion of the treasury with him. His successor would be elected by the National Assembly at gunpoint. The cacos would be paid off from the public treasury, and everyone was happy. Well, apart from the 90% of Haitians living in poverty, as everyone involved looted the public treasury. This cosy game of musical chairs was about to come to a screeching halt. The National Bank of Haiti, which doubled as the public treasury despite being a privately run bank, began to make some very odd decisions. It began speculating with government revenues and prioritizing repaying foreign bankers, leaving the government coffers bare. With money running short, the fight for what was left became much more violent. One president was poisoned. Another died after an ammunition depot mysteriously exploded and destroyed his national palace. It was almost as though someone was trying to destabilize the country. The bank had originally been owned solely by Haiti's French former colonial masters. They hadn't cared how much was looted by the political class, as long as they could join in with massive fees and hike charges. Recently, though, American interests had managed to buy a stake in the Banque Nationale. Its new US offices were now on Wall Street, inside the headquarters of the National City Bank of New York, today's Citibank. Taking control of this account was Roger Leslie Farnham, the ultimate Washington insider. He had big plans for Haiti and his bank's role in its future. America had always enjoyed a complex relationship with Haiti. Far from being friendly to the second nation to gain independence in the New World, its successful slave revolt had terrified the South before the Civil War. Afterwards, its general instability had worried US policymakers for decades. By 1914, these fears were only getting worse. The Panama Canal was now open, and Haiti lay on one of the key routes approaching it. Imperial Germany was allegedly sniffing around, and the small German community in Port-au-Prince controlled 80% of the economy. These fears were actually massively overblown, but they were being fanned by Farnham for his own interests. He wanted complete control of the Banque Nationale and over Haiti's customs revenues, solely in the interests of paying off its national debt, of course. Before I go further, from now on a number of US officials will talk about Haitian affairs using the N-word. Obviously, I won't be using that word. Instead, I'm changing it to native. So remember, when I am quoting someone and they say native, in reality, they were using a far more offensive word. Luckily for Farnham, President Woodrow Wilson had just been elected, bringing with him a new Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan. Perennial failed presidential candidate and populist crusader, he knew little about foreign affairs. When it came to Haiti, he was so ignorant he didn't know they spoke French, remarking, "Dear me, think of it, natives speaking French." Despite this, he fired all of the State Department experts on the Caribbean, replacing them with his friends, including one Roger Farnham. He was easily persuaded to take part in one of the largest bank robberies of all time. Farnham fed him a story that Haiti's precious gold reserves could be wasted by the elite It would be much safer and better for Haiti if America seized the gold reserves. All for the good of the Haitian people, of course. On December the 16th, 1914, 2 American gunships slipped into Port-au-Prince harbor. Soon, 8 Marines disguised in civilian clothes headed for the Banque Nationale. When I say disguised, 8 brawny white men with crew cuts in a predominantly black city actually stood out like sore thumbs. Let's head to the Banque Nationale on this fateful day. Something strange has been going on all week. You are one of the few Haitian clerks working at the Banque Nationale. However, the French and American staff have suddenly started having secret meetings, while the gold reserves are being packed into wooden boxes. You guess it must be at the order from the National Palace. But why the secrecy? Why exclude the Haitian staff, if so? Suddenly, the doors of the bank burst open, and 8 brawny white men rush inside, pulling out revolvers and canes. One fires into the air, causing the few customers to scream and cower on the floor. It's a robbery, you think? Hand over the gold reserves, one of the white men yells. Another Haitian clerk approaches and shouts, "On whose authority? We won't hand over our nation's treasure to common thieves." As quick as a flash, a cane smashes into his stomach. As he lays on the floor, a gun is shoved in his face. "By the authority of the United States government, that's who." The French and American employees don't look the least bit fazed, calmly handing over the gold. As you look after your wounded colleague, you realize they knew about this all along. They betrayed your nation under orders of the Americans. Soon, that gold was loaded onto a gunship, destined for a vault on Wall Street. Over half the gold reserves of Haiti were seized, worth $500 million then, about $13 billion now. Haiti was furious, demanding its return. Bryan's dismissive replied that the heist was, quote, "merely a withdrawal of funds by the authorities of a private bank," end quote, plus the New York Times' sneering commentary that Haitian semi-barbaric minds saw in it a threat of violence, did little to smooth things over. With the gold stolen, Haitian politics spun out of control. Vilbrun, William, Sam seized power, only to be immediately threatened with a coup organized by another faction. Unlike his predecessors, he wasn't going to go quietly. The treasury was bare. There was nothing to steal to give him a comfortable exile. 200 members of the mixed-race elite, including a former president, were arrested and massacred in the central prison. This broke the main rule of the cozy coup. Its mixed-race backers must never be touched. Mobs of enraged mixed-race Haitians rose up across Port-au-Prince. The police chief behind the massacre was dragged out of the Dominican embassy and torn to bits. According to one witness, his body was shot, hacked, and defiled by every passer-by, and by evening had become an unrecognizable pulp of flesh. The following morning, his remains were doused with cooking oil and set afire. President Sam suffered a similar fate. A mob, led by the fathers of his victims, dragged him out of the French embassy and quickly killed him with machete chops. Quote, "hands, feet, and head cut off, eviscerated, the body dragged through the street by mobs. Mixed race mingling with blacks in a wild orgy of revenge. Sam's hands and feet and head were stuck on pickets of the iron fence on our Champ de Mars, end quote. Haitian politics was getting brutal, and the country was in chaos. Luckily for them, there just so happened to be an American fleet, filled with Marines, just waiting to swoop in. And swoop in they did. They occupied Port-au-Prince at the cost of just one dead Haitian soldier who tried to resist. The response was so swift that it was almost as though the squadron had been waiting for a reason to intervene. That was because it had. A plan had been drawn up for the occupation of Haiti months ago, so detailed that it even marked where baseball fields for the soldiers should be built and where the Marines could buy rum. Appropriately, it was named after the inspiration for the whole occupation, the Farnham Plan. America wanted a yes man in charge. The current revolutionary leader, Dr. Rosalvo Bobo, was firmly told that, quote, "You are not the candidate because the United States forbids it," end quote. Instead, under the watchful eye of Marines with fixed bayonets, the National Assembly voted 100% for the American choice of Philippe Dutinav. North Korea? Eat your heart out. However, even Dutinav boldly saw the treaty America wanted him to sign. Haitian customs houses would be under US control, and half of Haiti's income would go to paying back American and French creditors, while Farnham, Citibank, would have complete control of the Banque Nationale. US Marines would occupy the country to maintain order. He refused to sign until he had a close encounter with Smedley Butler while sitting on the toilet, as we saw in the opening dramatization. As empires have so often found, it's one thing to conquer a country, it's another to occupy it. The Cacos, those mercenaries, bandits and local toughs in the north of Haiti, were furious at the occupation. It cut off their main revenue stream of backing rival candidates for the presidency. They soon began ambushing US Marines. A response was needed, but American commanders on the ground were either too timid, like Colonel Cole, who wanted more soldiers than made up the current US Army if he was to advance into the interior, or just a tad too racist and bloodthirsty, such as Little Waller, the infamous Butcher of Samar in the Philippines. You might think that there was no such thing as being too racist during the early 20th century, but Waller was truly in a class of his own. He frequently denounced Haitians as, quote, "savage monkeys," end quote, and remarked, quote, "I know the native and how to handle him. The same quality is going to be needed in Haiti," end quote. Instead, America made the wise choice of picking Smedley Butler to fight the First Cacao War. A man of action, he also didn't want to wage a race war in the Haitian countryside. Heading into the bush with just 108 men, his first stop was Gonaive, a small coastal town under siege by 800 Cacos, led by General Pierre Rameau. Arriving in the town, they had just settled down for supper when their Cacos attacked. As the sun begins to set, you thank God that the oppressive heat is finally beginning to cool off. You are a US Marine who's been trekking through the bush for days to reach this tiny town. Eating a well-earned supper, suddenly the bowl you're holding is blown away by a gunshot. The town's under attack. No time for uniforms. Just to grab your rifles, you'll be fighting in your underclothes. Hundreds of Cacos have swarmed into the town. Thankfully, they are terrible shots, as bullets sing and ricochet around you. Your rifle barks back. 3 bandits charge towards your position. 2 fall to your bullets. But the last one leaps at you with a machete. Bayonet and machete clash as you fight for your life before you run him through with a firm thrust. The Cacos are retreating, but that crazy butler orders you forward. You chase them through the bush until you reach a small clearing, only to find yourselves outnumbered by hundreds of Cacos and their general on horseback. You're preparing to make a run for it, but Butler strides forward towards their leader. The bemused Cacos let him pass and watch in silence as he drags Rameau from his horse and kicks him in the face. You watch in horror, waiting for the firefight to start. But the Cacos don't kill him. They don't even raise their weapons. Instead, they flee into the bush. That butler is brave, but an absolute madman. It's hard to believe, but this really happened. Butler explained that, quote, "This was more humiliating to him than a defeat in battle. His prestige with his men was destroyed, and he was no longer the great general." Journeying out again with just 4 officers and 37 enlisted men on a reconnaissance patrol, they were crossing a river in the driving rain when the Cacos launched an ambush. Butler was in his element, shouting, "Isn't this great?" They had to make a run for it, but in their haste, the Marines lost their lone machine gun in the river. Gunnery Sergeant Dan Daly volunteered to retrieve it. He swam the river by himself, found the machine gun, strapped to a dead horse, hefted it onto his back, and coolly hiked back to the rest of the patrol, all under fire. For his heroics, he would win his 2nd Medal of Honor. The Marines spent a miserable night, besieged by hordes of Cacos who blew conch shells and screamed death threats. But come the morning, they charged out and destroyed the entire enemy force. Returning back to base hungry and exhausted, somehow their only casualty was 1 slightly injured Marine. They just don't make soldiers like this anymore. It's a shame the heroics weren't for a better cause. Soon, just 1 Caco stronghold remained, Fort Riviere, an old French stronghold planted atop Mount Noir. Colonel Cole, cautious as ever, thought it would take an infantry regiment and an artillery battery to conquer the fort. Butler, however, had other ideas. He told Cole that, "Colonel, if you let me pick 100 men from the 800 you have here, I feel I can capture the place at once without wasting more words." He got his men. After days trekking up into the mountains, they finally spotted Fort Riviere as the sun rose up over the hills. Charging forward, bullets rained down upon them until they reached the safety of the walls. However, the entrance to the fort had been sealed. They would need another way in. Then, Butler spotted a small breach, a drain, 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, leading into the interior of the fort. It was obvious that anyone crawling through the hole would be an easy target for a defender. Butler stares at the drain, for once undecided. If he thinks it's dangerous, then this is a suicide mission, you think. You're a new recruit to the Marines, but feel like a veteran after the amount of fighting you've done in your short time in Haiti. Finally, Sergeant Ross L. Iams steps forward and declares, "Oh hell, I'm going through." You all follow him into the drain. Squeezed into the narrow, foul-smelling drain, deafened by the echoes of gunfire pinging off the walls. Finally, you emerge into the courtyard. A big caco sees the sergeant and opens fire, but somehow misses. The sergeant jumps into the courtyard before he can reload and shoots him dead. Soon, hundreds of cacos descend upon you, throwing away their ancient rifles and wielding swords, clubs, rocks, and machetes. They chant, "Tuyo!" Kill them. One charges at Butler. He fires, but misses the caco. Just in time, you raise your rifle and gun down the bandit, saving his life. As the rest of the squad join you, it becomes a battle to the death. The mud floor becomes soaked in blood, but the enemy is no match for your bayonets and rifles as you fight on. The remaining cacos fled over the walls, most being gunned down by the Marines outside. It was a spectacular, if gruesome, victory for the Marines. They had killed about 100 cacos. The only US casualty was a Marine who lost 2 teeth when he was hit in the face with a rock. The fort was blown up, and the back of the cacos had been broken, at least for now. Combined with Butler's aggressive tactics was the generous treatment of cacos who surrendered. They were given amnesty, money to turn in their guns, and consideration for government employment. All in all, it was one of America's best counterinsurgency operations. The battle at the fort would haunt Butler, though. In a letter to his wife, he wrote that the past several weeks seemed like a horrible nightmare. Such terrible work and terrific excitement. Of course, at the time I thought it was fine, but looking back at it, the sight is not a desirable one, particularly those awfully shattered bodies at Fort Riviere. As a reward, he was put in charge of creating a new armed force, the Gendarmes. These were made up of black Haitians under white American officers, and they were to do the dirty work of the occupation. America was triumphant, but the business interests that had lobbied for the occupation in the first place were getting greedy. The control of Haiti's finances and customs were no longer enough to satisfy their appetites. The Haitian Constitution banned foreigners from owning land. How to get around this? By writing a whole new constitution for them, of course. This was too much for President Dutinav and the whole nation. They balked and refused to go along. Smedley Butler and his gendarmes were called on to persuade the Haitian government of the American point of view. After browbeating and threatening the president and 4 cabinet members for hours, they finally gave in and signed the new constitution. In his memoirs, Butler would later write that the signatures were so small that one needed a magnifying glass to read them. He then marched armed men into the National Assembly. The deputies were in the middle of ratifying a constitution they had written. They greeted Butler with boos, jeers, and hisses. The gendarmes cocked their rifles and sealed the doors, silencing the alarmed deputies. The assembly was dissolved, the deputies driven out at bayonet point. It would be 12 long years until it ever met again. To cover up the American involvement, The Haitian newspapers were ordered not to mention it, and the official records of that day were destroyed. The US written constitution was submitted to a national referendum on June the 12th, 1918. Polling places were overseen by rifle-wielding gendarmes who asked which way you were going to vote. Unsurprisingly, it passed overwhelmingly. Haiti was now a dictatorship under complete American control. Officials would take no decisions without consulting American advisors, while its finances were completely controlled by Wall Street. Everything seemed placid, but under the surface, resistance was beginning to bubble. The previously sure-footed butler was about to overstep and cause a second Caco War. The problem was Haiti's poor infrastructure. Butler wanted to build a national highway system. Mostly, this was so troops could be moved around quickly. The problem was he had no money to pay labourers on these projects. The reason why was all the customs revenues were going to foreign bankers. Then he discovered that Haiti had something called the corvée on its statute books. This was a law borrowed from France before the Revolution, where ordinary Haitians could be forced to do unpaid labour instead of paying taxes. Butler loved this idea. Tens of thousands of Haitians were seized, put into work gangs, overseen by white gendarme officers who ordered their men to beat slackers, all for no pay. For a nation built on a revolution against slavery, this was sounding awfully like the return of that institution, just with another name. As one corvée survivor said, "First, the work isn't paid. Second, you work with your back to the sun, wearing nothing but pants. Third, they only sent you home when sick. Fourth, you didn't eat enough, just corn and Congo beans. Fifth, you slept in prison or on a building site. Sixth, when you tried to run away, they killed you. Now then, is that not slavery?" Butler would deny there was anything wrong with the corvée, claiming it was just like an Amish barn raising. However, his real feelings were revealed behind the scenes. When receiving official praise for his building achievements, he remarked that it would not do to ask many questions as to how we accomplished this work. Butler was soon sent to France as World War I broke out, and his successor ended the corvée. But it was too late. Hatred of America had reached dangerous levels and would soon explode. The magnificently named Charlemagne Messina Perrault, a mixed-race member of the elite, saw an opportunity and began a revolt in northern Haiti. Soon the gendarmes were overwhelmed, and large parts of the country were off limits to the Americans. He even managed a raid on the stronghold of Port-au-Prince. Unlike the First Caco War, the Americans struggled to fight back. Most of the best men and officers were on the Western Front now. It also didn't help that the new gendarmes commander sounded like one of the Seven Dwarfs, boasting the proud name of Dopey Wise. The situation was only saved by the actions of a 26-year-old Marine, Herman Hannigan, who came up with an elaborate scheme to capture Charlemagne. Using his own money, he financed a Caco band led by Jean-Baptiste Conzi, a wealthy mixed-race planter who has set up headquarters in an abandoned old fort called Capois, along with a gendarme deserter, Private Jean-Edmond Francois. Hannigan hoped that Charlemagne would take Conzi into his confidence and thereby lead the Americans to his hideout. To complete the ruse, Heineken staged an attack on the fort that Konzi seemed to drive off. Heineken was even wounded, or so it seemed to anyone who saw the gendarmerie captain skulking around Grand Rivera, with his arm in a sling, oozing red ink. As the piece de la resistance, Konzi presented Charlemagne with Heineken's pearl-handed Smith & Wesson pistol, which he claimed the wounded Marine had dropped. The local people and Heineken's own Marines muttered about what an embarrassment all this was. The mighty Americans, beaten by those ragged nobodies from the hills. But Charlemagne was nobody's fool. He smelled a rat, leading to a dramatic confrontation. Along with your leader Charlemagne and his other bodyguards, you stride into Fort Capoise. These so-called cacos point in amazement. Some make sure their rifles are near. Charlemagne shows no fear, however, as he demands their leader kneel before him. "Konzi," he said, "you are not a true cacao. You are nothing but a spy in the pay of these accursed Americans." Konzi remains cool and replies, "If you believe that, the best thing you can do is kill me now." You have to admit, you're impressed. Charlemagne stands over him and raises his pistol until it is pressed against his head. You hold your breath. If he pulls the trigger, there will probably be a firefight to deal with. Then he lowers the gun and speaks, breaking the tension. "I'll give you a chance to prove if you're a true cacao," he said. "All you have done so far is to lead a few small raids against a few small villages. Take me a real town. Take it away from the Americans, and I'll begin to think of you as a true cacao." Konzi bows his head and replies, "I will do it." The town he picked was Grand Rivere. Hundreds of Charlemagne's cacos would join in the fight. The Americans set a trap, reinforcing the town and setting up machine guns. At the same time, Heineken and his second-in-command, a Marine corporal named William Button, slipped into the jungle with 20 gendarmes dressed in caco rags. The two white men covered themselves with lampblack so they could pass as Haitian in the dark. Probably would be kicked out of the Marines these days for that tactic. Their target was Charlemagne, who was encamped on a nearby hill. It was a dangerous journey through the jungle filled with thousands of cacos, having to bluff their way through checkpoints and almost being discovered at least once. Finally, they reached the edge of Charlemagne's camp. Just 15 feet away, they saw the guerrilla leader, illuminated by the reflected light of a campfire. Heineken drew his .45 caliber automatic pistol and put a bullet through his heart, while the rest of the gendarmes drove off the remaining cacals. The death of Charlemagne broke the back of the resistance, except for one commander who still continued to fight in central Haiti. Benoit Batreville was something of an oddity among the rebel commanders. Most of them were mixed-race Catholics. Benoit was a black voodoo priest, however. In a way, he was the direct descendant of those who started the original slave revolt that drove out the French all those years ago. The campaign against him was pretty easy, except for one grisly episode. On April the 4th, 1920, a small gendarme patrol, led by Lieutenant Lawrence Mouffe, was ambushed by a large Caco force led by Battreville himself. Mouffe was badly wounded and left for dead by the rest of his patrol, but in fact, he was still alive. Battreville took him prisoner for a voodoo ceremony. He decapitated Mouffe and cut out his heart and liver, toasting them over a fire and passing them around for his men to eat. The heart to steel Mouffe's courage, the liver for his wisdom. Finally, Benoit and his men rubbed bits of Mouffe's brain over their weapons and bullets to give them better accuracy. News of this ritual spread like wildfire around Haiti, enraging the Marines and redoubling their determination to capture or kill Battreville. A Marine patrol acting on a peasant's tip finally came upon Battreville's camp on May the 19th, 1920. In the ensuing firefight, Benoit was wounded. As he was struggling to draw his revolver, the Caco general was finished off by a Marine sergeant with a pistol shot to the head. Lieutenant Mouffe's binoculars were found around Battreville's neck. With the Second Cacao War over, America's dominance over Haiti was complete. 2,250 Cacos had been killed between 1915 and 1920, while almost 12,000 had surrendered. The Marines lost just 13 men, the Gendarmerie 27. America has struggled with small wars after World War II. Why did the mission to Haiti go so well? Firstly, it helped that the US was also occupying the Dominican Republic as well, so there was no border for the rebels to flee over and regroup. Secondly, a mixture of daring, good intelligence, and genuine attempts to offer the carrot as well as the stick worked wonders. Yet the methods used were not uncontroversial. It was discovered that a local Marine commander had 2 Haitians shot to death just for the excitement of it. He was pronounced insane and confined to a mental institution. When one of his Marine subordinates was put on trial, his defense lawyer claimed that killing natives in Haiti was comparatively routine. The resulting scandal led to a congressional inquiry that was something of a whitewash, but still managed to find some disturbing incidents, especially about the corvée and forced labour. While America wanted to hold on to its control of Haiti, its occupation became increasingly embarrassing. Elaborate methods were used to hide the puppet strings, with more authority being given to the gendarmes. This state of affairs continued until 1929, when a massacre once again made the hidden hand of America all too public. As protests broke out across the whole island against the occupation, in the town of Likaya, some 1,500 protesters, armed only with stones, clubs and machetes, confronted 20 Marines. The Americans tried to disperse the crowd by firing over their heads. When a Haitian lunged forward and bit a Marine, another American used his bayonet to drive back the attacker. The enraged crowd surged forward, and the outnumbered Marines, fearing they would be torn to bits, opened fire. 12 Haitians were killed, 23 wounded. It was the beginning of the end of the occupation. By 1934, the last American Marines had left. They left behind a complex legacy for Haiti. On the positive side, there had been stability, economic growth, and a national road network constructed. On the other hand, the institutions necessary to maintain these benefits hadn't been built. The roads were soon in disrepair. The old instability returned, more violent than ever. The only institution America had built, the gendarmerie, now renamed the Army of Haiti, became one of the most repressive forces in the Caribbean, dominating politics and further destabilizing the country. Even the road network, built by forced labor, wasn't quite the blessing it seemed. It had been designed to allow American troops to be rushed from their capital of Port-au-Prince to anywhere in the nation. What this meant in practice was that to drive anywhere on the island, you first had to go to the capital. Imagine if you wanted to drive to LA from Chicago, but to do so, first you had to drive to Washington, D.C., and then you can get on a road to LA. For my fellow Brits, imagine you wanted to drive from Birmingham to Cardiff, but to do so, first you had to drive all the way back to London, and then head to Cardiff. Not an efficient system, is it? Imagine the economic effects as well as the sheer inconvenience. Haiti would become highly centralized on Port-au-Prince, in a way it just hadn't been before, leaving the capital overpopulated and filled with festering slums that still exist today. Even Smedley Butler became disillusioned with his work in Haiti. He would later call himself a gangster for capitalism and claim he had made Haiti a decent place for the national city bank boys to collect revenues in. He was very right about that. They made an absolute fortune out of Haiti. While the occupation is barely remembered in America today, the ghosts of it are still very present in American culture. While in Haiti, US servicemen heard strange tales of corpses being reanimated to work for voodoo priests, the zombies. Originally a cultural memory of the slavery Haitians had endured, zombies would soon start appearing in books and films. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like, subscribe, leave a review, or tell a friend. Next time, we'll fast forward into the future for Operation Uphold Democracy. As America tries to build the New World Order as the Cold War ends, a coup in Haiti leads to another invasion. Join me for a tale of a Haitian leader battling President Bill Clinton with voodoo, an anti-American militia that was led by CIA agents, and the Cali cartel. See you next time for more Forgotten Wars.